departure from the Lorentz, the conventional Lorentz symmetry. The history goes back to Russia in Dubna, the Joint Institute in 1967, talking about Russia under the communists. There was no dominance at that time in Russia by the Einstein followers. Fellow Russians were free thinkers. Of course, they had political problems, but none of my capability to discuss about. I am a scientist. I'm only interested in the scientific part. And indeed, Blokintsev in 1967 indicated that we had to expect deviations from the Lorentz symmetry in the interior of hadrons because the medium was hyperdense and many other reasons. Those are the key reasons, incidentally, that we have assumed the very construction of hadronic mechanics can be also traced back to Blokintsev thinking in Dubna in 1967. And Blokintsev essentially said that those deviations in the interior of hadron expected by this super dense structure, another non-local reason, he was mainly thinking about non-locality, then can manifest themselves in the outside and be measurable via deviation from the behavior of the mean life of unstable hadron with speed. And he proposed a variety of deviation from Einsteinian law of special relativity and constructed various models. The Blokintsev idea were taken by many other physicists up to a point, and then there was the truncation of those seminal, very important studies. On experimental ground, there was a moment of great joy. I still remember very vividly when in 1983 Aronson announced that at Fermilab he had measured clear deviation from the Einsteinian behavior of the main life for the decay of K0 meson between 30 and 100 GeV. It was a moment of great excitement because finally we see some light. This will steer off new models, new theory, new mathematics. It will be a major advancement in human knowledge in all segments because the Lorentz symmetry is at the very foundation. Our hopes were short-lived, and at that time I was still naive. At that time I was beginning to know personally the dark side of science that is unfortunately permeating all fundamental assumptions in this trillion-dollar, totally unregulated trade we call physics. In fact, immediately there was a rebuffal by Grossman, a few years later, there was a rebuffal by Grossman and claiming the exact validity of Einstein theory in the behavior of K0 meson with speed. First of all, by studying the Grossman paper, you can see all sort of geometrical manipulation of this and that and that. In other words, it's very easy to redo the same calculation by changing one parameter, one form factor, and you end up with a completely different result. So it was a theoretical, it was an experimental belief, but it is not because the elaboration is questionable. The issue is the following. Grossman claimed the preservation of Einstein relativity from 100 to 400 GeV and not from 30 to 400. Therefore, the violation of special relativity from 30 to 100 remained in full valid and full effect. And so does to this day, to the best of my knowledge, because any attempt to submit and request the repetition and finalization of this fundamental aspect has been truncated with all sort of posturing. Now, very well. Now, what most distressingly, this is something I have experienced personally, when I submitted papers following the Grossman article based on the violation of the Lorentz symmetry in the interior of hadron. Systematically, all editors will indicate, no, the verification of the exact validity of the Lorentz symmetry in the interior of hadron has been confirmed by Grossman. Very well, after this, this is essentially the time evolution which is in question. It's questioned because of, according to Bloch-Inceff view, because of internal non-local effect. According to my view, I agree with Bloch-Inceff completely. In addition, I add non. And this is the isotopic law. Now, there are many laws departing from the Einstein law. The power of the isotopy is their universality. Remember, we start with the most general conceivable space-time. And this is one of their implications. Now, and in fact, Aringazin and others have proved the universality of this law, because all other laws, beginning with Bloch-Inceff, the new law, etc., they are all particular cases of this law, and they can be obtained by a different expansion in terms of different parameter and with different truncation. So this indeed is the universal law that is expected in the interior of hadrons when isolated from the rest of the universe. Well, in 1992, I'm sorry, with Cardone, Mignani, and myself, we examined both Grossman and Aronson results, and we showed that indeed the iso-Minkowski space allows an exact fit of all data, including the deviations as well as the verification, therefore confirming that indeed there are the expectation, which is so plausible, that the Lorentz symmetry in its conventional formulation cannot be considered as being exact. It's just too simplistic, linear, local, and Hamiltonian, for them to be exact in the densest medium measured by mankind in laboratory. However, keep in mind that the meaning of the isotopy. The meaning of the isotopy is to show that indeed that the Lorentz symmetry is indeed exact in the interior of a hadron. Because this universal time evolution for all possible space-time, it verifies the Lorentz symmetry. Only the Lorentz symmetry is subjected to a broader realization, non-linear, non-local, and non-potential. So I have to clarify that we do not claim the Lorentz symmetry to be violated. At the abstract level, it remains exact. We do claim, however, that the conventional 20th century linear, local, and potential realization of the Lorentz symmetry cannot possibly be exact in the interior of hadrons, as proven experimentally by Aronson and as still standing as of now. This is the last example of experimental verification of the isotopy of the Lorentz-Poincare symmetry that I have prepared for this lecture, and it is given by the so-called Bose-Einstein correlation. It is another distressing case of what it is I have dubbed as the $1 trillion totally unregulated scientific trade we call physics, in which the trade, namely the value of theory, is set by academic consensus, not by physical reality in most cases, and in certain cases physical reality is intentionally, studiously suppressed to maintain the validity of beloved or preferred theories. This is the case. Very well, what is the Bose-Einstein correlation? It's basically we have a proton and an antiproton at high energy, they collide, and they coalesce in what is called a fireball. This phi ball is extremely elongated, is not in scale. Imagine an ellipsoid much more elongated than this. After coalescing, they annihilate in a bunch of mesons that eventually remain correlated, even at very large energies. Very well. The claim is in all papers written in the 20th century in this field, with the exception of the papers in hadronic mechanics, is that Einstein's special relativity and relativistic quantum mechanics is exactly valid for this event. As a matter of fact, there are insisting rumors, which cannot be verified, that the name Einstein was added to this event, Bose-Einstein correlation, because the originators had doubt on the validity of Einstein theory for this event. And that's why they throw in Einstein name, and that is why Einstein is a scientist perhaps has been most abused in the history of mankind. Very well, let's see why there's such a strong statement. Well, the argument is incontrovertible. I assume this is a post-PhD lecture series. I assume readers and listeners are familiar with the calculation, the conventional relativistic derivation of the Bose-Einstein correlation. Here it's based, for instance, for the 2-point correlation function, that and the Hamiltonian is, of course, Hermitian, two-dimensional, and then you do the calculation for the probability, then you calculate explicitly this is the wave function, you introduce the form factor, and from the strict application of relativistic quantum mechanics, you obtain one expression, and one expression only, this one. Then you confront it with experiments, and the disagreement is dramatic, as you will see in a moment, in any case. So what people have done, okay, let me throw in arbitrary parameters. So first I tried to 1, 2, and of course were insufficient. At the end, they did indeed achieve full compatibility with the experiments, but by introducing 4 arbitrary parameters. Not 1 or 2, 4 arbitrary parameters. They are called chaoticity parameter. And here they are. With this type of arbitrary parameters in each of those terms, yes, they did achieve an exact representation of the experimental data, and therefore they claim that special relativity is exactly valid for the Bose-Einstein correlation. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to denounce this as a manipulation of basic knowledge. If proposed as plausible, as a hypothetical, should be respected, but as thrown with authority, no, I'm sorry. Why so? Because the 2-point function is two-dimensional, and the Hamiltonian is diagonal. At most, you can introduce 2 parameters, at the very, very most, of totally unknown and arbitrary character, so extremely equivocal, due to adapt the reality to the preferred and beloved theory. But 4, there is no possibility whatsoever that 4 parameters are compatible with the basic expectation, basic axiom, with the basic axiom of expectation value of relativistic quantum mechanics. Therefore, this case must be denounced as an illustration of this $1 trillion totally unregulated trade we call nowadays theoretical physics. Now let's look at the isotopy. Ladies and gentlemen, with the isotopy we do achieve, indeed, we avoid this basic inconsistency. Why? Because the isotopic element can be non-diagonal. And once it is non-diagonal in 2 dimensions, you do have indeed 4 new quantities that you can reach, that you can use to achieve representation and consistency with reality without manipulation to adapt reality to a preferred theory. This was done by myself in 1992, and then was done by Cardone and others published in this Russian journal. Both of those articles are available in free PDF download. You can see the details of the derivation in those papers. It's rather elementary. At the end, you end up with this expression in which there is no free parameter at all. It's all derived from first axiomatic principle. And then you can see the fit You can see the other expression here. This is the final expression for the two-point correlation function. As I said before, there are no arbitrary parameters. There are only momentum transfer and another entity that originate from the dynamics. In addition, there are the characteristic quantities. What is the function of the characteristic quantity? In this case, is to represent numerically the actual shape of the fireball. The three space components, they give indeed an exact representation of the elliptical shape, very elongated, and for geometrize the density of the fireball, essentially. And then you look at the fit, and indeed, we do have indeed an exact fit at both very high energy and at very low energy. And those are the numerical value of the characteristic quantities. The three that give you the characteristic, the actual shape of the fireball, and the others that gives you the density. But careful with the other. And this is the fit conducted at both high energy and low energy of the Bose-Einstein correlation. And those are the numerical value. The space component of the characteristic quantity again gives you the exact shape, very elongated ellipsoid of the fireball, and the fourth characteristic quantity gives you a numerical value of the density of the fireball itself. Careful that this numerical value B4, which is the inverse of N4 of the index of refraction, is bigger than 1. This means that the index of refraction is smaller than 1. This means essentially that the causal speed in the interior of the fireball is necessarily bigger than the speed of light in vacuum, as it is systematically the case throughout all calculations and all fittings that we have done throughout many years, confirming the very essence of the Minkowski-Santilli isogeometry, namely the prediction of that the causal speed within physical in the interior conditions are indeed arbitrary, depending on the local condition, expectedly in the interior of a black hole to be rather substantially higher than the speed of light in vacuum. In conclusion, the isotopic formulation of the Bose-Einstein correlation does indeed provide full respect to Albert Einstein. Why? Because remember, the universal symmetry is the Lorentz-Poincaré-Santilli isosymmetry, which is locally isomorphic to the conventional one. Only we realize that in a broader level, in a broader way. However, the point is that under this formulation, that isotopic symmetry remains fully valid. Ladies and gentlemen, all those aspects that we have studied at this moment from a purely geometrical viewpoint, in the lecture 3b, we shall review them from the viewpoint of the applicable relativity, and then we will pass it in the subsequent lecture to their rederivation again by using dynamics. Thank you for your attention.
Professor Santilli, you stated that the ether as a universal substratum is perceived as being incompatible with special relativity. In reality, I believe it is incompatible as assumed during the 20th century, as shown by string theories where no underlying medium is assumed.
Thank you for expressing your view. You quote string theories that are very interesting from both a mathematical and a physical viewpoint, and are authored by highly qualified scientists. As such, their view must be respected, of course. Nevertheless, physics is interesting because it's polyhedric, and every aspect of nature generally admits a variety of interpretation of views. In that spirit, I want to express my personal view, which is essentially the following: that the ether, as a universal substratum, is not in conflict at all with special relativity. And the reason is that it is impossible, even on epistemological grounds, let alone on environmental ground, it is impossible to identify the privileged reference frame that allegedly is admitted by the ether as a universal substratum. In the absence of a physical identification of a privileged reference frame, I see no conflict whatsoever between the ether and special relativity, contrary to virtually the entire philosophy and attitude of physics of the 20th century. Also, remember that I have assumed the exact validity of special relativity in vacuum as the building stone, rock of the entire series, and vacuum for me is the ether as a universal substratum. So therefore, I gave some considerable thinking and investigation on the compatibility. As a final comment, I would like to say that the need for the ether as a universal substratum is overwhelming from virtually all segments of physics, from classical to particle physics, nuclear physics, astrophysics, and cosmology. This will come very evident during this series of lectures. Therefore, the assumption of the ether is unavoidable. It's a problem that has to be addressed. And by ignoring, it does not disappear at all. It becomes multiplied. If I decide one day to write a paper on string theories, the very first assumption on which I will base the entirety of the paper will be precisely that, the assumption of the ether as a universal substratum and the interpretation of strings as vibration of the ether. Because in the absence of such interpretation, then strings becomes epistemological, becomes, I don't want to use the word philosophical, but there is no vibration, the same way as there cannot be a wave without a medium. At least a medium, that interpretation is by far the most plausible over any other. In addition, if I write a paper on string theories, I will also formulate it via the use of isomathematics of the preceding lecture 2b. The reason is that some, not all, but some of the papers on string theory verify squarely the theorem of catastrophic inconsistency of non-canonical and non-unitary theory, because especially when they include gravitation, a Riemannian manifold, which is non-canonical, and therefore they have a very nice Polaroid pictures, but the moment they introduce time evolution, they have the problematic aspect of lecture 2b, which in reality is just not at all unsolvable. On the contrary, no, we already know their solution. So why not to address in such a way, by such dual way, on one side, by beginning with a solid foundation, the ether as the basis of everything of the strings, and on the other side, by making sure that the treatment is truly consistent, namely it is invariant over time, because without those two necessary ingredients, it is my opinion that string theory, as currently formulated, will not survive the test of time. With the understanding, however, as I stated at the beginning of my statement, that should be respected, because the authors are very respected scientists. Thank you.
Professor Santilli, can you please clarify your view? You briefly indicated that matter is totally empty and space is totally full.
Well, that is also a very nice question. I provided the answer with my very first scientific paper, which I wrote when I was an undergraduate student in physics at the University of Naples. In the 50s, the paper eventually was published in 57 in Italian. At that time, the scientific community was involved in a very raucous and vociferous debate regarding the necessary absence of the ether as a universal substratum because of the lack of the so-called ethereal wind. Namely, that when an object moves in this universal substratum, should feel a resistance. Since the Earth feels no resistance in the traveling around the Sun, therefore the ether does not exist. That was the argument because of the perception that the ether was in conflict with Einstein's special relativity. And so therefore it had to be eliminated. And all sorts of arguments were invented, such as the photons, reduction to light to photon, and to avoid the notion of electromagnetic waves, because an electromagnetic waves without a medium cannot exist, etc. The paper essentially indicated that, the ethereal wind itself cannot exist. And the thinking was the following. First, in this paper on 1957, I said, let's consider the electron. What is an electron? The electron is a pure oscillation. Oscillation of what? Oscillation of a medium. In other words, absolutely there is not a tiny little mass in the interior of the electron that oscillates at 10 to the 20 hertz. No, it's just a pure oscillation. It was proved so in a paper by Schrödinger in 1935, who showed that the variable x of the solution of the Dirac equation for the free electron describes 10 to the 20 oscillation. But of what? Again, we cannot do philosophy. Something has to oscillate. The only possibility is the ether. Very well. So the paper stated, okay, once we recognize this main point, when we move the electron from one place to another, can the electron experience any ethereal wind? Absolutely not, because you only move oscillation, whatever it was original, to the next one. The paper then went to say, but if this is an inevitably, incontrovertible, apparently, the case for the electron has to be the case also for all other elementary particles constituting matters, proton, neutron, baryon, etc. But then the conclusion was this, that when we move a mass, such as when I move my hand from one place to another, I move, there is no material object that is moved. We only move the characteristic oscillation that creates my hand from this region of space to another region. And when the object is in motion, basically the variation of constant velocity is the inertia. And then I enter in all sorts of other consideration. Now, but the basic point was paraphrasing the content in Italian of that paper to what we are now, the point is that was essentially the following, if I remember, has been some time now, half a century, is the following, that if you can hear my voice because there is the air, the medium that propagates the sound. So therefore, you can see my face because there is a medium that propagates the light, because light is an electromagnetic wave. And the photon itself, photon is not a tiny little ball, so that we avoid the problem of the heat. No, this is politics. No, the photon is a wave packet. So you don't avoid the problem of the heater by reducing light to photons, because it's a wave packet, those are waves. Oscillating, again, what is oscillating? The most plausible solution, by far much more plausible than any other hypothetical conjecture, just to support, to eliminate the fear of damaging a preferred theory, which is way too much. I cannot follow this type of extremes of trying to conduct physics. No, so the light is an electromagnetic waves. Light and photons are electromagnetic waves. Therefore, they need a medium for their existence and propagation. Also, the article went to saying that sound waves are longitudinal because air is compressible, as it is well known. Light is transversal. Therefore, the ether as universal medium must have characteristics similar to what we consider rigid. Indeed, the title of the paper was Perché lo spazio è rigido, namely why space is rigid. And now, with this premise, now I can go back to your question, which was solved in that paper. When we recognize that matter can be reduced to pure oscillations of this universal medium we call the ether, then it is evident that matter is totally empty and the space is totally full, which is precisely your question, and is precisely the very quick, brief statement I made during my lecture. Namely, inside the matter, contrary to our sensory perception, inside matter there is no mass. Mass is just an abstraction of the characteristic energy caused by the very high frequency of oscillation of the ether. So therefore, you go deeper into matter. You go, the atom is almost empty. Then the atom, you go to the electron. The electron is empty. It's just an oscillation of the ether. And then the nucleus, there is a bunch of many different oscillations, dramatically more complex than the electron, of course. But still, there are no tiny little masses that oscillates in the constituents of the nuclei. And so therefore, you go at the very, very end of the structure of matter, you find no mass. So matter is empty. And you go from the other side, you look at the ether, you see a medium of incredible features that are enormous energy. I said it's about, in 1 centimeter, has more energy in the interior of the sun. Is rigid, has something equivalent to rigidity, and are very features that can be calculated very. As I said more than once, the return to the ether as a universal substratum is unavoidable. As a matter of fact, I believe that the ether is the ultimate frontier for the entire third millennium. Because as I stated during the lecture, once we know and we can interact with the ether as a medium, then the medium will allow mankind, keep my word on record, the ether as universal medium will allow mankind one day to reach the star without a fuel tank. Thank you for the question.
Professor Santilli, please review again the evidence for casual speeds bigger than the speed of light in vacuum. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. This is a magnificent question. Just by asking such a question, you can trigger a significant leap forward of scientific knowledge, because once such a question is posed, has got to be analyzed and an answer has to be provided. And that is new, we're talking about new vista in science. Well, to answer this question properly, I have to consider 3 separate aspects. I have to consider the emotional aspect, then the conceptual aspect, if you want also partially theoretical, I cannot do it now, and then the experimental aspect. Let's start with the emotional aspect. You and I and all scientists, we are human beings. So therefore, emotions have a significant part in our theories. As a matter of fact, it sometimes can be even dominant. In particular, it took for me years and years to control the enormous respect that I had for Albert Einstein. And so for years and years, I didn't dare even think that I could somehow possibly go beyond Einstein. But then it came one day that I said, no, this is the end of my career as a physicist. So I had to pose the question, okay, Einstein is correct under the conditions stated by Einstein. But for new conditions unthinkable during Einstein time, then maybe there is some broader theory that is applicable. Once you cross that Rubicon, then you go higher in the mountain and you see new vista. So there is no point, everything I'm saying from now on, it will be meaningless and there is no point to state it unless you pass that Rubicon. And you control your emotion and say, okay, but what's behind Einstein as far as new sciences, new development? The second aspect is the conceptual foundation of the issue, the speed, arbitrary speed of light. To answer this question, let's remember Einstein's condition, namely that the speed of light in vacuum is the maximal causal speed under 3 conditions. That is applied to a point particle, the particle moves in vacuum, and the acceleration is caused by action at a distance, potential interaction, such as electromagnetic interaction. Under those conditions, the statement is absolutely true, as I stated during the lecture. Let me repeat again to avoid misunderstanding. It is tested every day in particle accelerator. Under those conditions, the speed of light is the ultimate period. But, that's the polyhedricity of science. The pertinent question is, are potential interactions the only forces in the universe that can accelerate objects? Absolutely not. No. As a matter of fact, they are the minority. The greater majority of forces in the universe are of contact type. Namely, they have 0 range. Therefore, idea of a potential, it makes no sense. Besides, they are variational, non-self-adjoint. Even thinking of potential energy means total disqualification, instantaneous removal from the physical community. It's a new field. Now, the evidence that contact interaction can accelerate a particle is visible to everybody. Look at a balloon in air, for instance. Okay, all of a sudden the balloon accelerates. How it accelerates? Because of contact interaction. Now, immediately people will say, oh no, but that's gravitation. No, no, the balloon will accelerate horizontally. There is no gravitational potential. No, it's a contact interaction in which the idea of a potential makes no sense. Now, it's a new field. You have to admit a new field. So the question is we do not know. That is indeed a scientific state. Or let's see what happens. That's scientific. But reach conclusion that under contact interaction, the speed of light remains the maximum speed of the universe. This is pure politics. I do not intend to be part of. Then you look deeper into the structure of nature, and you will see contact interaction everywhere. Not only at the Newtonian level, but you see at the particle level in the structure of a proton, of a neutron. When the synthesis of the electron and the proton to create the neutrons, the electron has to penetrate completely inside the proton. It's the most hyperdense medium that we have detected in laboratory. Of course, then the contact interaction with zero range are unavoidable. And then you go into the interior of a star. You see this becomes much, much bigger, and the contact interaction, non-potential, variational, non-self-adjoint interaction, they are the central object of study of the entire series. They become more and more dominant until you go to black hole, where there, of course, then becomes dictators, like czars, and to control the entire physics. So the scientifically open issue is what is the maximum causal speed under contact interaction? Careful. Not in vacuum, that's Einstein, and that has to be respected, is out. No, in interior physical media. The answer that we know at this moment is that in interior condition, under contact interaction, the maximal causal speed are arbitrary, can be arbitrarily bigger than the speed of light in vacuum. The lecture that I presented, the geometry I presented, the isogeometry, introduced this very forcefully. It's unavoidable. Now, whether is this proved experimentally is a different issue. And finally, let's look at the experimental profile of this very important question. Now, I have to quote again the experiment by a group of experimentalists in Germany a few years ago who propagated an entire Beethoven symphony at the speed measured as being bigger than the speed of light in vacuum. The experiment was conducted by passing electromagnetic waves through certain guides, electromagnetic wave passing through guides. Contact interaction is unavoidable. They are not propagating in vacuum. So the scientific correct statement is, since we are talking about an interior problem on the electromagnetic wave on the contact interaction with the guide, the scientific statement is the speed is unknown. But once the statement, oh no, when they come with the statement, oh no, it's a phase velocity, so as to maintain the dominance of Einstein theory for all possible conditions existing in the universe until, up to the end of time. Ladies and gentlemen, that is politics. I do not intend to be part of. No, so in any case, it is in my opinion, it is the first incontrovertible experiment in which the entire Beethoven symphony was indeed propagated at speed bigger than the speed of light in vacuum. The most plausible interpretation with numbers, not with political motion and concoction in academic horizon, no, with calculation. The most plausible interpretation is that was the group velocity was bigger than the speed of light. You don't transmit an entire Beethoven symphony with the phase velocity. It is extremely implausible. I have to see the calculation. Then of course I will accept. But this is only one, ladies and gentlemen. Speed of light, causal speed of light, much bigger than the speed of light in vacuum, are everywhere. In particle physics and in astrophysics and cosmology. Let me make you a few examples. Look at the synthesis of a hadron. It's very easy to from other particles. The synthesis of the pion, from an electron and a positron. What's the structure of a pi zero? Is a particle antiparticle. Call it parton, call it quark, call it isoparticle, call it any way you want. But the main point remains. When you do the calculation, you take the politics aside and you do the calculation to achieve from a light particle, 134 MeV of a total rest energy of the path zero, you must surpass the speed of light in vacuum as a tangential speed of the constituents. There is no way out. Any other time, any other view is epistemological or political, but not truly scientific. Then you go to the synthesis of the neutron inside the star from a proton and an electron. You have the same problem. There is 0.872 MeV missing from the sum of the rest energy of the proton and the electron. The only interpretation that after decades of study of the problem I could find is precisely the constituents of the neutron after the synthesis cannot, the rest energy equivalence cannot be mc squared, no way, but is m multiplied by the maximal causal speed within a physical medium, which we will study in the next in the lecture 3b. But the point persists. You look at the calculation of the tangential speed of the constituents of the neutron has to be necessarily bigger than the speed of light in vacuum. Finally, but this is across the border. In all, when you do objective calculation without any political influence of various directions, you do it on your own, and you see that it's unavoidable. And finally, let's go to the cosmological aspect. It is my opinion that the argument in favor of arbitrary speed, arbitrary causal speed in nature, originating from astrophysics and cosmology, are perhaps the most forceful of them all. Let's analyze why the conjecture of dark energy was formulated and immediately accepted by a large variety of physicists. Why? Because there was the insufficient energy to explain the dynamics of the universe. That is what officially known. But you have to dig deeper so if you really want to be innovative and discover something known. No, this is what appears on the surface. What is the reason behind the scene? The reason behind the scene is that speed of light in vacuum is considered the maximal causal speed throughout the entire universe, including in the interior of a black hole, in the interior of quasar. That is the origin of the conjecture of dark energy, because once you assume that conjecture, you miss the energy in the universe, and then you have to assume hypothetical energy. However, if you accept that in the interior of hyperdense media, such as already star, but then quasar, and then black hole, the causal speed can be higher than the maximal causal speed in vacuum. There is no need whatsoever of voicing this conjecture of dark energy. There is no need, because the mc squared divided by n4 squared is amply sufficient to represent the universe in its entirety. But there is one final point that I have to bring to the attention of your attention, as well as the attention of receptive colleagues in good faith. Let's assume that indeed the hypothesis of dark energy is plausible. I don't think it's plausible. It's too much far-fetched to protect a law in the conditions that have never been verified. So it's way out of whack, in my opinion. Please, I respect the opinion of the other, respect mine. But let's assume that somehow I'm just ignorant on the field, and I do not know the theoretical and calculation, the argumentation that support the hypothesis of the dark energy. Very well. But then, ladies and gentlemen, this energy has to be equally distributed everywhere in the universe. But then, ladies and gentlemen, the impact on the dynamics of any part of the universe is zero, because it's uniformly distributed. In other words, the hypothesis of the dark energy has indeed bypassed the confrontation of the issue. The famous mc square is in doubt. That has been achieved, that objective. But it does not mean that has solved the problem in a plausible way. No way at all. The most plausible, direct, verifiable interpretation, I repeat, verifiable here with the laboratory on Earth. Once we go deeper into the structure of hadron and we verify that the local speed, tangential speed, is the speed of light in vacuum, then this is evidence that the maximal causal speed inside star, quasar, and black holes is bigger than that in vacuum, and the need, and there is a consequential any need whatsoever of the dark energy. Thank you for the question.